We had a good deer season here at the Proving Grounds too. You may recall I harvested a nice buck with a bow and another with a firearm. We had a lot of history from observations and trail cameras of both bucks I harvested, but the one I harvested with the firearm we knew was pretty old. When we first picked him up last year, he already appeared very mature. That hunt turned out to have more lessons in it than I realized at the time of the harvest. Do you notice anything odd about him? Maybe the way he walks or the way he looks? Hold your thoughts, or better yet, put them in the comments below. Stop the video and give us a line, because there'll be a test later on. As several of y'all know, the Proving Grounds 2 and 1, the original property, of course they're connected, were put in a CWD zone many years ago. Zones in Missouri are roughly about 5 miles by 5 miles, depending on the zone. And someone harvested deer at the very opposite end of the zone that tested positive for CWD about 5 years ago. And in Missouri, which has a great program, once they find a deer that has CWD, they take a zone and of course don't allow any baiting or mineral stuff that would make deer get nose to nose, and add some tags or allow hunters to harvest more deer. The goal is just to reduce the amount of nose to nose or deer to deer interaction to slow down the spread of CWD. Since that time, we've tested almost every deer harvested here at the Proving Grounds and Proving Grounds 2. We didn't include fawns as someone harvested a fawn because fawns rarely show positive for CWD, but through all those years, we never had a positive. A few days ago, I got a call from someone I know at Missouri Department of Conservation, MDC. We're having a good talk about turkeys and deer and whatnot, and getting ready to hang up and say, well, Grant, there's something else I need to tell you. And at that moment, I felt the gut punch coming. He said a deer we had harvested had just tested positive for CWD, or they just got the results back, and that deer was Gravedigger. There's no doubt that information for any landowner or hunter in an area is a gut punch, but fortunately, I've stayed up to date on the latest CWD research. I attended the first national CWD convention in Denver many, many years ago, decades ago, and have followed along or even been involved with that work through the decades. CWD was first found in Colorado in a research facility almost 60 years ago, I guess maybe even slightly more than 60 years ago now, and found in the wild a bit more than 40 years ago. So there's been a lot going on with CWD. And there's just as much, if not more, misinformation about CWD. Here's some facts based on a bunch of research. So you're gonna hear everything all over the floor mat out there, and I'll get a bunch of hate mail, but let's boil down to the facts, and I'll give you some resources so you can check it out on your own. But CWD is primarily spread deer to deer, or where a deer's just been, another deer is. So it's close contact, deer to deer. It's spread by a prion, or a misformed, misshaped protein that causes other proteins in basically the nervous system, the brain, the spinal column, whatever, to misfold or be misshaped. That's why it's called a spongiform disease. When you look at it under a high-powered microscope, that tissue, the brain or other tissues, look like it's got holes in it, like Swiss cheese or a sponge. So when you think about CWD being spread deer to deer, saliva should come to mind, right? Like you wouldn't lick off the spoon of me, or I wouldn't lick off your spoon or something. But when we think about deer, they salivate, adult deer, on average about 2 gallons a day. So there's a lot of saliva. Ever watch a deer close? Maybe you got a young buck in by your stand, you're not gonna harvest or something. He's eating acorns or something. If you're watching close, food particles and saliva are almost constantly falling out of the deer's mouth. They salivate a lot. And a deer that's positive for CWD, it's very likely that those drops of saliva include these misshaped proteins, or the prions, that are the causative agent, or the germ, if you will. It's not a germ, but we use that common term, that spreads the disease. That information should make anyone's ears start ringing that's in a CWD zone or an area where CWD has been found that still uses bait or minerals, because deer are concentrated right there in a small area, and they're salivating over and over and over, and other deer are coming to the same spot. So I'm not throwing anyone under the bus, I'm just sharing facts here because there's so much misinformation. Mature bucks have an infection rate that's usually about twice a mature doe's in the same area. And that makes sense because bucks go doe group to doe group to doe group, especially during the rut. They're sniffing and licking and going all over. Where does, they tend to stay primarily in their same group. It's a little family group, if you will. I don't really like that term, but a lot of does in a group are related. They're not going doe group to doe group to doe group. And bucks tend to have a little bit larger home range than does do, again, on average. So there's just more chance for them to come in contact with this prion, or the causative agent of CWD. Given this, Gravedigger was a prime candidate for CWD. He was probably past his prime, but probably had a larger home range during his prime, probably went doe group to doe group, and just more years on the landscape. You know, the more time you spend where there's a germ or something that's going to make you sick, the more opportunity you have to pick that up. Given all these factors, I'm not surprised Gravedigger, a very old buck, was the first deer to test positive from the Proving Grounds or Proving Grounds 2. Now, we test an awful lot of deer. Like I said, every deer we harvest, except if someone harvests a fawn. So we're going to pick it up faster than maybe neighbors or other people in the neighborhood. They don't tend to harvest it, and it's not against the law, but they don't tend to harvest as many does or as many deer, and they certainly don't have them all sampled. In Missouri, the rules are in these CWD zones that every deer harvest during the first 2 days of the firearm season must be sampled for CWD. They've got check stations set up all in these areas. And the first 2 days of firearm season is when the bulk of the deer are harvested. More people hunt those days than any other 2 days throughout the rest of the season. We know how to pull our own samples, so from the first day of archery season to the end of archery season, we're collecting samples. We have a larger database and are more likely to pick it up than many of our neighbors. When I got the call from the Missouri Department of Conservation, of course, we were fully cooperative. They wanted the exact location of where the buck was harvested and the location where the remains, after we took the meat off, were deposited. That's because that can become a CWD site where you put the remains. And this is why it's so important not to transport deer. If you're elk hunting in Colorado in an area that has CWD, and you don't follow the rules, because most states make it illegal to bring full heads or full bodies back to an area. So you got to leave that in the CWD zone. You can bring the hide and the meat and the clean skull, but not all the nervous tissue. So, you know, you harvest a big old bull out in Colorado and you say, I don't pay attention to that. And you just cut the whole head off and haul it back, and then you clean it up, or the taxidermist cleans it up and throws, you know, the brain material and other stuff out on the landscape. Well, you could be depositing CWD out there, and other deer could lick that site, or even a predator, a scavenger, could eat that and go defecate it somewhere. That get in soil, a plant take it up, and a deer eat that plant. Now, those are extreme, but real examples of how CWD can spread. Another thing the Missouri Department of Conservation wisely asked for was all the meat. Well, this is where our system really come in handy. Once CWD was detected in our area many years ago, we label each package of meat specific to that deer. So if we've killed 2 does, we kind of keep them separate, and we're going to process and label, you know, doe 1, doe 2, buck 5, whatever. Each package of meat has a unique label on it. We process all our own deer, and we simply use a Sharpie. We use the Cabela's bags when we vacuum seal our deer, and we just write on a Sharpie on there. So when they asked for the meat, we went to our freezer, pulled all that meat out, put it in a box, they're going to come pick it up. Which brings me to the point, well, gosh, Grant, they didn't call you for a little bit. Well, man, they had tens of thousands of samples to go through after the firearm season. What if we'd ate some of that meat? Well, I want to say right now, never, not one time, never has it been shown from CWD to go from a deer to a human. You may remember mad cow disease, and that went from cattle to humans, but it's never been shown for CWD to go to humans. So scientists in a lab somewhere have taken human genetics, put it into mice, and force-fed them a bunch and whatnot, and that did transfer, but never been shown. There's been a lot of cases. I remember one real famous one from Wisconsin where a guy had killed a couple of deer, took them to a big church special, and everyone had venison, and both does or both deer ended up testing positive. And the Centers for Disease Control is still following all those people today. There's like over 100 people, and they've never had any issues. But I think a much larger sample size for decades. CWD's been on the landscape in northern Colorado, 70% of the tags there roughly are residents, and they eat a lot of mule deer and some whitetails and elk, of course, and they've studied that area. The health department has studied that area, and there is no sign of CWD in humans. You would know it because it's 100% lethal. So if we'd ate a package, I wouldn't panic, but why take that risk with the disease that's 100% lethal? So just label your venison, keep eating. It's a very healthy meat. Have your deer tested if you're in a CWD zone, an area where CWD has been found. Just take some common sense precautions like you should with anything, and you'll be great. Hey, my testimony's clear. I got a freezer full of venison, and Trace and I had some venison last night, and we're going to keep eating venison. We'll have each deer tested, and we'll keep eating venison until science shows different, and I don't look for that. Now, all diseases can mutate and cross species boundaries, go from a deer to a human, or a dog to a cow. But those are rare instances. We've got a lot of history with disease studies. Some diseases are affecting many species. A lot of them don't, and CWD, fortunately, seems to be one that does not. As part of our management, we're going to continue harvesting deer as always. We want to harvest enough does to make sure there's plenty of groceries on days like today when it's cold and spitting snow, or in that hot, dry August when it's really dry and there's not much out there. We want to make sure there's always enough groceries for each deer to have quality food and enough food. So we're continue harvesting does at a high rate to balance the number of deer with the groceries. Part of that is also our CWD program, where we sample all those deer and keep that population down just a bit. Now, all the internet chatter says, oh, the states want to eliminate deer, or it's a government conspiracy, or the insurance companies just want to get rid of deer. Nonsense. Nonsense. Don't believe such nonsense. The goal is just to reduce the deer. There's still plenty of deer, so there's not as many deer going nose to nose, and can reduce the spread and prevalence of CWD until some really sharp scientist hopefully comes up with a cure. There's no cure right now, folks. There is no cure, no matter what you read or hear, known right now. But people are working on it, and I'm confident someday we will have that cure.
Growing Deer is brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's. Also by Green Cover Food Plots, Winchester, Moultrie Mobile, Fleet Outdoor Apparel, Morel Targets, Fourth Arrow, Scorpion Venom Archery, Case IH Tractors, Ward Laboratories, Burris Optics, G5 Broadheads, Prime Bows, and Redneck Hunting Blinds.
We haven't used any supplemental bait or minerals since CWD was first found in the area, and we're growing as big a deer or bigger deer than we ever have. We work hard on our native vegetation and food plots. I really enjoy that process. If you think about, a corn pile out there, it's the size of a, 5-gallon bucket or bigger or whatever. Well, gosh, deer are urinating, salivating, and defecating all ways to spread disease in a small area. You've seen them. Your place, your neighbor's place, you've been hunting somewhere. It's a yucky pile. Even when it's dry, there's so much urine and saliva there. It's usually a muddy mess, and it is just a prime grounds to breed germs and parasites, irregardless of CWD, stomach worm, lung worm, all those nasty parasites which reduce the health of your deer herd grow in that slimy, nasty mess. Here's the challenge for you. If you're a guy that puts a lot of corn out or something, just take a white piece of bread, that'd be your petri dish, and just, pat it a little bit in that nasty, yucky mess, then go put it on a plate in your house. In about 2 or 3 days, it'll grow a massive head of hair. That's all nasty yuck growing on that plate, and you're telling your deer to lick that every day. This just doesn't make sense. Put that in more scientific terms, some researchers out of one of the northern states took samples of the soil at bait and mineral sites, in samples, I think it was 50 feet away, but a few feet away. And the number of prions, the causative agent for CWD, was significantly higher, where of course all the deer are standing, urinating, defecating, and salivating, than a few feet away where they were just traveling to the bait site. There is no question about this. Maybe a simple way to explain it is think about a child goes to a preschool or something, and little Sarah's got a runny nose or got the flu or something, and she's playing with a favorite toy, and she touches her face and touches the toy or whatever, and then little Johnny plays with the toy, and the next day Johnny's sick. We all know this. This is common sense. Well, deer are not vaccinated unless they're in a high fence or something like that. It's illegal to vaccinate deer. I want deer to be wild anyway. They shouldn't be vaccinated. So you've got deer out there with no protection licking the ground where something could be 100% fatal. Let's just stop. One of the worst things about CWD is just like the gravedigger. They could be carrying that disease for, up to almost 2 years and not show any sign. I didn't know it when we processed it, when we're looking at the meat, when we're using our Cabela's vacuum sealer or grinder. We had no indication there was anything wrong, and that deer had 100% fatal disease. So it's walking around spreading that disease on landscape, and there's no marker that says, hey, we need to stop that deer from spreading the disease. That's the worst thing about CWD. There is no visual cue, no way to cull the herd specifically for critters that have CWD. The only way we knew is the free test offered by the Missouri Department of Conservation. We collected samples, a couple lymph nodes here in the neck, and they gave us the results back for free. It's an amazing service that the Missouri Department of Conservation provides to the hunters. I mentioned earlier there is so much misinformation and rumors and intentional lies about CWD. It's really sad to me. We're gambling one of the greatest natural resources we have, the white-tailed deer and all deer species, elk, moose, all the deer species. So let's think this through. There's a couple of great examples. One of them I like to reference is, because it's so well known and the data is unequivocal, but Wisconsin and Illinois 20 plus years ago both discovered CWD about the same time. Wisconsin, they took a different approach. At first they really panicked, oh my gosh, but then they started taking a really lax approach, where Illinois took a really scientific approach. Hey, this is spread deer to deer, so we want to reduce that happening. We're not going to allow people to put out bait or mineral sites, because that really increases the opportunity for deer to be nose to nose or licking where another deer salivated, urinated, defecated. That's just common sense, right? And they went in those areas that had CWD and reduced the deer population some. They didn't eliminate it like all the internet chatter, but they reduced it some. And again, Wisconsin did not take those steps for the most part. And now we fast forward to today. Well, in some counties in Wisconsin, if you harvest a buck, there's a greater than 60% chance it has CWD. More than half the bucks walking in that county have CWD, certainly mature bucks. And in Illinois, the highest prevalence rate, the highest infectivity rate, if you like that term better, what's the future look like for a deer herd with the 100% fatal disease, where bucks have about 60% infection rate? There's no question. These are big data sets, real world, not experimental, real world, on the ground. And I don't hear anyone saying, boy, I don't want to go hunt in Illinois, man. They got CWD there. No one says that. If I offered you a free tag to bow hunt in Illinois, you'd say, yes, sir, thank you. So Missouri adopted a very similar method when they discovered CWD, about 8 years later or so than Illinois. They haven't had it quite as long, or haven't known of it quite as long. Same thing, get rid of the baiting and feeding, mineral stuff like that in areas where CWD is found, and reduce the deer population a little bit. No one in northern Missouri, where CWD was first found, no one says, well, I don't want to hunt there. No one says, oh, I'm not watching those TV shows filmed there. There's no big bucks. Those guys are killing big bucks, and girls are killing big bucks. Daniel's from northern Missouri. He knows how great the hunting is there. But sound scientific management is what we need, not all this conspiracy talk. Oh, it's the government trying to get rid of deer. The government makes a ton of money off deer hunters, folks. Or it's the insurance companies. They just charge more money when you have a deer wreck. So a little common sense would go a long ways. We just want to do what's right for the deer herd. And the state of science right now is these programs. We need more states to adopt these programs. I am very hopeful a cure is found soon for CWD. I am so hopeful for that. I hope we get funding for that project specifically. I think it should be federal funding, because it's a nationwide crisis. But until then, we all need to do our part, and we can't do our part unless we know the truth. There are two sources that have proven to share honest, true information about CWD. One is sponsored by several nonprofit groups. I think, deer groups and elk groups and other great groups all work together. Boone and Crockett, I know, is a big part of this, to sponsor CWD-Info.org, CWD-Info.org. That's the website I go to have the latest research results, the latest tallies on CWD. It's a great source. Another one is the National Deer Association, NDA. That's, the former QDMA, for those that don't know. Great organization. I think I was member number 18 or something like that of the QDMA. Great guys. I know them all. I've worked with a bunch of them. And they, in their weekly newsletter, share a segment about CWD and the latest research or developments. I scan that every week, and I think you should too. I want to address just one other frequently asked question about CWD. Well, aren't food plots just as bad as a bait pile? And this, of course, comes from the guys that, want to hunt over bait, and I understand that. It's a great way to see deer, but no, it's not. You take something the size of a 5-gallon bucket or even the size of a pickup, and multiple deer come there every day, and they urinate, salivate, and defecate. That is a cesspool. A food plot, a small one's 1/8 of an acre or something like that, and once they eat the vegetation, there's no reason for deer to stick their mouth right back there just then. They're not all standing in the same place over and over and over. So no, food plots are not the same as a bait pile. To take that further, do a really good job of managing your native habitat. Open up those canopies, use a prescribed fire, do whatever it takes where you're located in your location, and you can spread the deer out even more so they're healthier. Of course, they can grow bigger antlers, have more quality groceries, and they're not nose to nose all the time. This episode is not designed or meant to be a complete summary of CWD. It's not, and I gave you a couple great resources to learn more, and stay tuned as more developments happen. This is just sharing my experiences on my property and hopefully an encouragement that the sky is not falling, but we need to take the appropriate steps to preserve and protect. Maybe conserve is the best word. Conservation means the wise use of a resource. We should be wise users and managers of the white-tailed deer, all deer species resource, and that means following some simple steps and cooperating so we can slow the spread of CWD and work with researchers to hopefully help find a cure. I've said this before, but on this episode especially, I'm going to get a lot of hate mail. Just stop. You keyboard cowboys, just stop. I've heard it all before. I've been called every name, man, I'm fat, skinny, tall, dumb, whatever. I've heard it all before. So these are just facts. If you don't agree, I'm sorry. I hope you take time to learn so we can all work together to protect the resource. Man, watching deer, being out in the timber, building food plots, doing prescribed fire, whatever, to me is one of the most enjoyable ways to be involved with creation and see the work of the Creator's hand. But even more importantly, I want you to take time every day, no matter if we agree or disagree, take time every day to be quiet and purposely seek the Creator's will and apply it to your lives. Thanks for watching Growing Deer.